Hello everybody, my name is Stephen Redman. Welcome to Pastor's Library. This is the channel where we talk about everything to do with theology books, books that might be on a reading list for your seminary course, for your bachelor's or master's degree in theology or biblical studies, or simply books that have piqued your interest online or in a bookshop or possibly in your own pastor's office. Whatever it is, I would try to give you a bit of insight and help along the way, because books do cost a lot, don't they? And we like to help and guide you about what might help you and might not. So today I want to talk about my favourite commentaries on the book of Numbers. And Numbers is a great book. It does have this great chunk at the beginning, which is literally all about big hats. You know, it's Abraham begat Isaac, Isaac, big hat, Jacob, and so on. But despite all the list of big hats, there are little gems as you read through the text which will make it worth ploughing through to chapter 4, chapter 7, and as you get through these lists, there are some absolute wonderful, inspiring verses. So don't be put off by the genealogies. There's more to it than that. Numbers is the book where we've got the daughters of Zelophehad appealing for a share of the property, where we've got the test for unmarital unfaithfulness, where we've got something about lepers, where we've got, of course, the great incident with the spies sent out to spy in Canaan and their report back, and lots of other incidents. This is a book that, you know, if we didn't have Numbers in our Bible, we'd be missing a lot. So a commentary on Numbers is a good thing to have. And what I would say today is I was highly recommended Catherine Sackenfield's International Theological Commentary on Numbers. This was published in 1995. It's 194 pages, coming up now for 30 years old. You know, that means it's probably on the borderline of quotability, but I think her reputation would still get you in an essay. And she does have some things to say. Now, what I'm going to do with all of these commentaries, I'm going to compare one thing that they say about chapter 13, the incident of the spies. And of the 194 pages in this, there is a single page that deals with chapter 13. And I looked at this and I thought, well, I can't compare chapter 13 in all of these books, because this one has nothing to say. I mean, it literally just repeats what's on the page. And I was terribly disappointed. But I have to say the rest of the book isn't much of a low point. And so, whereas I've nothing really to offer you from chapter 13, this does have some good quotes for chapters before and after it. Now, Interpetation is a very popular commentary series, particularly in the US. And this one is a hardbound book with a nice slipcover, very nice design. These keep well. In fact, quite frankly, they're excellent. And this particular commentary was published in 1996. So again, it's aging a little bit. It has 195 pages. Now, sometimes I have been a bit disappointed with this series, but I have to say, particularly when I'm looking at the Old Testament, I often find that they're very good value. And one thing that's really good, particularly if you're in the USA, is that there's an awful lot of these on the used market, and that can mean that you can pick one up quite cheaply. So never ignore Interpetation. And whereas what I've said is just my experience of using the Old Testament, some of the New Testament ones are good as well, but not always quite as good. So when we get to chapter 13, this is talking about the spy story, and it says that they were despising, the 10 spies were despising God's free gift. And I'm sure that you could easily link this to a good old gospel message about not despising the free gift of God. But the promised land was for the taking, he says. This is Dennis T. Olson. And they had to take it. They had to take hold of it. But they refused to trust God, denying God the opportunity to make good on his promise. And isn't that something we've all got something to learn from? We should never deny God the opportunity of fulfilling his promise. Sometimes that means that we end up taking riotously frightening steps into the unknown. But actually, if God is with us, we never have to fear that. And I think that that's a lesson that Israel learnt, and one that we should learn from them. So that's interpretation. My third one is the Abingdon Press Old Testament commentary, Abingdon Old Testament commentaries. And this I've called Numbers is by Carolyn Pressler. This was published in, I think, 2017. It's very up to date, very accessible, easily readable, and at 323 pages, it's got a reasonable amount of detail. But I have to say that this is fairly unusual for an academic commentary, that you can just sit and read it. It's really good. It's very engaging. Carolyn here has, I think, offered something that is really excellent. Now, when you get to chapter 13, this is the unique point of it that I would compare it with others. It talks about God being the protection, that Caleb was saying, we don't have to worry about this, God is with us. And the word protection here is the same word as shadow. So we think of Psalm 91, he who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. And I remember when I first came across that verse, the first time I felt it really speaking to me, I thought, well, hang on, God is light. How can he cast a shadow? But then I realised that the word really was about protection. And I want to be, if you like, under God's wings where he is protecting me. And that, of course, was the promise that the children of Israel had if they would take hold of it. So I thought that was a worthwhile book. It has a lot to say. Now, the next one I have here is a little bit different, a little bit more heavy-going. And this is the JPS Torah commentary on Numbers. I am showing you the back cover because this reads back to front. It starts with the title. It has the dedication and then contents and introduction. And the end is at the beginning, so to speak. And it's like that because this is by the Jewish Publication Society. It is just trying to make you feel a little bit more like you might be reading from an original copy. This was published in 1990. It's 520 pages. And this is by an outstanding Jewish scholar, Jacob Milgrom. Now, I have to say, everything I've read of his, which is not a lot, but I have read other things by him, is absolutely outstanding. And I really feel that this book has something to offer us. Now, I did a video on the JPS Torah commentaries, the 5 volumes, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Did that recently. It's online. You can access that. And I did say that Numbers and Genesis, to me, were the outstanding volumes in the series. And if I want to clarify that, I would say I think Numbers is the absolute standout commentary. And I think to have 5-volume series and Numbers to be the outstanding commentary tells you that the author is himself outstanding and has delivered the goods. So I think this is absolutely brilliant. Now, the format with these books is you've got the original Hebrew at the top of the page, by the side, English transliteration, and below that you've got the regular sort of commentary that you would expect to read. But then at the end, you've got a series of essays, they're called excursus. And what you have in these excursuses are headings like some political institutions of early Israel, the Levites, guards of the temple, the encroacher and the clergy. Lots of really good things. But I have to say that these essays are probably the best bit, because there's stuff in here that you would not pick up. I mean, I've been involved in the church, volunteering, since I was 8 years old, which is a little while now. And I've been a full-time pastor for 21 years. And I find in all of this time, all of my study, that Jacob Milgrom has something to offer me that no one else has done before. And it's because of his Jewish heritage, his Orthodox Jewish heritage. And some of these essays are absolutely brilliant. For example, there's one on Urim and Thummim. Now, I remember a couple of years ago, someone said to me, "Can you tell me something about Urim and Thummim?" And I witted on for 10 minutes, and then I said, "I'll go and look it up for you." I went and looked it up, and quite frankly, there wasn't anything that I hadn't told them. But this has got, 3 pages or something on the Urim and Thummim, and it's really helpful. It shows you how the Urim and Thummim might have physically been and how it may have operated. And I thought that was really brilliant. There are loads of others that are very good. There are a couple of essays on Balaam. Diviner or sorcerer is one. And Balaam and the Dea at the Allah inscription, that's very interesting. And then there's the apostasy of Baal Peor. So there's actually loads in here. So the downside is these commentaries are not cheap. In the UK, if you're going to buy one for new, it's going to cost you £65-70 sterling. And whereas if you're going to buy the dollar version in the USA, of course, postage and packing can make that more expensive. But what you really need to do is look for used copies, good used copies. Now, I had to buy, I think, 2 of these new, and the other 3 I got good used copies from America, and they were sensible prices for postage and packing. And I think that's the key. Sometimes on eBay, I might have to pay $25 postage and packing, which adds a lot to the cost of a book. But these came to me quite reasonably. And I think that's where you've just got to look for. So if you've got a local thrift shop that might have them in, a local Christian bookshop that's got a used section, or again, your local eBay, there are lots of opportunities. So don't just write them off because it's not a cheap book. This is certainly a book that has something to offer. Now, when we go to chapter 13, there's 2 things here that I thought were good. He also suggests that when they say the land you sent us to, what they're doing is they're accusing God of lying about the promised land. They're accusing him that this is not the land you promised us. And how important to read between the lines and see that. Milgrom is saying that, his understanding of the Hebrew is that's the inference. And I thought that was very helpful. And he also says that the issue of we looked as like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we must have seen the same to them. What he says is that for grasshopper, read shrimp. If you can imagine a little tiny kid in your school sports team that was never tall enough to reach the ball or something like that, what he's saying is that is the type of reference that we might use today. But he quotes from the Midrash and says, "How do you know that I made you look this way to them? Perhaps you appeared to them as angels." And I thought, now there's a good point. How did they know that was what they looked like to them? That was clearly ridiculous. Next one I have for you is the NIVAC, the New International Version Application Commentary. This is a 2-in-1 volume. It's Leviticus and Numbers. It's by Roy Gain, and it was published in 2004. 330 pages are about Numbers. So 516 or something of the other pages are about Leviticus. Now, firstly, this isn't a cheap volume, but when you consider you're getting a good commentary on Leviticus and a good commentary on Numbers in one volume, then actually it's not that bad. So don't just dismiss it on its price. There are some extremely good people who have endorsed this, like, for example, Billy Graham, Eugene Peterson. But what I would say is that this is the one that's the first commentary you go to if you are just looking for an application, particularly if you're preaching or leading a Bible group and you're just looking for a relevant thing for today that you can talk about the application. So I would say to you that this definitely has its place. In fact, I would say that of all the pastors, preachers I know in the UK, this is without doubt the most popular one to see on their bookshelves. So Caleb steps forward, calls the people to hush, and says, we should go up and take possession of the land because we can certainly do it. Now, what he's saying there, again he's saying this, that when I'm saying we can do it, what I'm saying is God and the rest of us can do it because he is with us. And it's like making a statement about the presence of God being with the people of God. And that's something we can obviously take for ourselves today. But how important it was to them then and how important it is to us now, and how crazy that they missed an opportunity because they didn't believe that the we included God, which of course it did. So that's the Knive Act by Roy Gain, and always worth considering. You will know me by now that I'm quite a fan of the New Beacon Bible commentaries. These are all subtitled A Commentary in the Wesleyan Tradition. And this one on Numbers is sewn together by Alex Fargeries, Barry Ross and Robert Branson. It was published in 2021. It's almost one of the very last of the New Beacon Bible commentaries to be published. 287 pages. This series is all really easy to access, very accessible, very readable. You can certainly get carried away with this, and yet it is truly academic with lots of very quotable things. Now, what I would say to you about this is that I think that this is a really good first one to look at, actually, because you will always get something on what you're looking about, and it might just spring you off into further realms of study. And whereas I don't consider this to be my prime commentary on Numbers, I do think it's really important. And I suppose the difference I have doing this particular My Favourite Commentaries video is that I think I don't really have any rubbish ones. I don't really have any poor quality commentaries on Numbers. And in fact, the majority of them are really good and they really have something to offer. So I don't want to say anything that would put you off any of these, to be honest, because they're very good. But talking about chapter 13, he says that the physical evidence was in favour of going into the land. By physical evidence, he means the fruit. But what he says is that the Nephilim is gossip and rumour. And as Christians, we are always at risk when we put our trust in gossip and rumour, because it never gets us anywhere. And I'm firmly believing as a pastor that gossip and rumour are some of the very worst things you can allow loose in your church. And I'm hot on them and I don't like them. People go on and on and on about sexual sin and other types of awful sin. But actually, gossip and rumour, I would suggest, are right up there at the top of God's list. And I think that the authors here are bringing out a really good point. It's a lot to offer. And the New Beacons are never too expensive. They're all paperback, but they're very, very good. Now, the Anchor Bible is often not a huge favourite of mine, in the sense that these are all academic books, sometimes can lean a little bit to the technical side, but sometimes they don't say anything that isn't any of the others. But I have found lately that in the Old Testament, again, these are very, very good. And this one is by Baruch A. Levine, again, a Jewish theologian. And this one is Numbers 1 to 20, so it covers the area that we're looking at. It's published in 1993, 528 pages. And I have to say, this is very good. Again, a little bit like Milgram, you will get a real insight into the Jewishness of the original text. And it will bring you into a point of seeing things from a more Jewish perspective. And I would suggest to you it's very good. There are obviously more than just this one volume, but that means that they aren't cheap, because if you're buying two, I'm not sure if there are 3 volumes of this, but I know that this is a real excellent commentary, really has something to offer. So here we have in chapter 13, he talks about the dread. He talks about being overwhelmed. He talks about what the spies are saying being a deterrent to success. And I think he's making that extremely clear, that what their report is they're bringing back a sense of dread. They're bringing back a sense that they're overwhelmed, and you should be too, that they are putting the rest of them off success. And despite Caleb and Joshua's different perspective, they were not able to sway the multitude. But what he does say, which I think is very interesting, he quotes a 9th century BC inscription of King Mesha of Moab, and he explains that the occupation of his country by the northern Israelites was as a consequence of the wrath of his God, and that it had been directed against the wrath of Chemosh had been directed against his own people, and that they had angered Chemosh. And when you consider that, you think, hang on a minute here, I seem to remember something about God saying to Abraham that your descendants will live as slaves in Egypt for 400 years, and they will then come back into this land that I've given you, because the sins of the Amorites have not yet been completed. And so I think it's interesting that he brings up this inscription, which is by someone who was there at the time and has a viewpoint that they are being punished. And I think that's very interesting. The Anchor Bible, 1993, it's a little bit old now, but really excellent. And I am sure that you would get away with a little quote from Baruch Levine, because it is really so very good. Now, this is a really new series, the Story of God Bible Commentary. This is by J. Sklar, and it's just simply called Numbers. And this one was published in 2023. It's 472 pages. This book is highly readable. It's greatly accessible. This is truly a brilliant commentary. The layout of the pages is excellent, and this is the sort of commentary which I have said there's not a lot of these about, where you could just get lost in the pages and you could start looking at one thing, and before you know it, you've read through 3 chapters, and it really is a great source of knowledge. I know that J. Sklar is considered to be a really proficient theologian these days and an expert in this field, and I have been really amazed by this commentary. So, Numbers 13, I have a quote for you from him. He says, "One might paraphrase that the people aren't simply strong, they're fierce. Their cities are not simply fortified, they're fortified and very large. The inhabitants are the opposite of weak. Among them are the gigantic descendants of Anak. The people are not few, they're everywhere. And with Amalekites in the south, Hittites, Jebusites and Amorites in the central hill country, and the Canaanites on either side of the hill country." Now, that is just paraphrase. But what I think Sklar really does there is he helps draw out the exact direction of the meaning of these words and helps us see that these 10 spies bringing the bad report were indeed really demoralizing the crowd. And it helps us to see that we should be very careful what we repeat, that wisdom is often seen by the person who has their mouth shut. And these men were simply not wise, and they robbed the country of a great time for 40 years. And I think that's appalling. J. Sklar has done well with this. I think this is something you should definitely consider. If you haven't looked at any of the other Story of God commentaries, J. Sklar Numbers, I would consider that as being a first one to go to. It's very good indeed. Now, the word biblical commentary I'm always going to shout about because it's a technical commentary. Sometimes the layout's a bit disappointing. When I say the layout, I mean the look of it on the page. Sometimes the font choices are not ideal, and also sometimes the printing is weak and the page is often not always white, and so sometimes it's difficult to read and you can get stuck on it and think, oh no, not another page of this. But it really is worth ploughing through. Now, in 2016, a revised edition came out of this, 442 pages, which is about 40 pages bigger than the 1984 original. This is absolutely brilliant for detail. If you want the detail, you will go to this. It really is excellent. Talking about chapter 13, he says a negative report argues persuasively that this constitutes a defamation of the delivering grace of God. The delivering grace of God. Wow. I think that's a great line. I really do. And also that when it says it devours its inhabitants, suggests that the residents of the land were cannibals. And I haven't seen that anywhere else, but that's an interesting point. May have something in it, I'm not quite sure. But what I would say is you will sometimes get detail in this that is not going to be obvious. Word biblical commentaries are being renewed all the time now. Zondervan bought them from Word, and the Zondervan versions in general, I think they're turning out an excellent book. Now, this is the NICOT, the New International Commentary on the Old Testament, the Book of Numbers by Timothy R. Ashley. This one in my hand is a 1993 book, 665 pages. I thought to myself, goodness me, that's 30 years old now. Looking it up, I find the second edition was published in 2022 with 656 pages. In other words, it's 9 pages shorter than the original. Now, I don't know if they've done something with the fonts or the layout of the book, but it sort of infers that it might be shorter. I'm not quite sure. But it's 656 pages versus 665. There can't be a lot in it. What I would say is NICOT have so much to offer. They always achieve a really high standard of commentary. And I really feel that this is always recommendable. Timothy Ashley, I think he's done well with this. And I've used this repeatedly over the years. And I know it's over the years because it doesn't have my rubber stamp in it, but it has a sticker that I used to put in books that I bought. And it's been in long enough that there's no way you can pull it off the page. So that's a book that I have found useful. It's been an excellent source of information for me. And what he says about chapter 13 is he says the spies connected tall men with the Nephilim. It was an assumption. And I suppose what he's saying is we should not make assumptions about the spiritual nature of people or things, and that we should not always just be carried along by an idea. And he says they didn't know who the Anakim were. because this is the first place in the Bible where they can be mentioned. But they associated them with the Nephilim. They were big guys, must be Nephilim. And I think that there is something for us all to learn there about not jumping to conclusions. So the Book of Numbers, the Revised Edition, is brilliant price at the moment. So I ordered mine this morning. But this is a really excellent book. Now, what I've tried to say to you is that this range of commentaries, I think, are all good. They all have something to offer. I don't think I've got any that are particularly weak, but some of them have clearly got more detail, go into the matter further. And I would say, that I think Milgrom is an excellent one. Baruch Levine is probably one that's excellent. The Nivak, the Nikot, they've always got something to offer. Word Biblical Commentary, always got something to offer. I do think the New Beacon Bible commentaries are excellent. And also, I have to rave about the story of God on this occasion. But I do have a 2-volume commentary, which I think simply offers the gold standard of commentary, Numbers, as we stand at this moment. And this is Apollos, Old Testament Commentary, Numbers 1 to 19 by L. Michael Morales, Numbers 20 to 36. These were both published in 2024. The first one is 502 pages. The second one is 715 pages. So you have got 1,200 pages of detailed work, of technical / academic work on Numbers by a guy who is clearly at the very top of the theological tree when it comes to working with the Book of Numbers. I think these are brilliant. They're not cheap, but then they're not also that expensive either. What I would say is, have a look around. If you find the second volume a bit cheaper than the first, buy it straight away and then keep your price watching for the first. These are very, very worthwhile. Now, the first one is the one I'm going to focus on because this is the one that has chapter 13 in it. And I think that this has so much detail in it. It offers so much help. I think that one would be, I would personally now be lost without it. This to me is the outstanding pair of books in my commentaries and Numbers. So if we get into chapter 13, then what I really found interesting about this is that he says that he focuses in on the fall. And he says the poetic justice begins with Yahweh's declaring that the people's carcasses will fall, that's the word Nepal, in the wilderness, just as they had said, if only we had died in this wilderness, that Yahweh was bringing them to the land to fall by the sword, Nepal, same word. The term fall was also integral to the consequences for the strayed woman, possibly the woman taken in adultery, chapter 5, and for the corpse-defiled Nazarites in chapter 6. That Israel's carcasses will fall or end in the wilderness is repeated 3 times in the chapter, verses 29, 32 and 33. And then the summary statement in verse 35 repeats evil community from verse 27 and reiterates for the 4th time that the first generation will die in the wilderness. Since Nephilim literally means fallen ones, then perhaps the fallen gods, ejected from the celestial realm, derives from the same root. This may be an instance of wordplay. And I think when he says this may be an instance of wordplay, I think he's being a bit coy with us, because I think he's already in that paragraph pointed out that this is a wordplay. And I think that is a really insightful thing to say that you don't necessarily see in the English that you see in the Hebrew. So, what I'm saying is there are some good Numbers commentaries out there. If you want what I think is the top of the tree at the moment, that's bang up to date. Because it's bang up to date, it's got a very, very good, worthwhile bibliography in it, which you can then see what the rest of your reading material might be. Then it's L. Michael Morale's The Apollos Old Testament Commentary. 2 volumes, 1 to 19, 20 to 36. These are outstanding. They're absolutely brilliant. I would peg them as the number 1 commentary to have. But the other ones that I mentioned to you have all got a place. And not everybody has to rush out and buy something just because I've said about it. But if you are looking for something that cuts the mustard, that really is at the top level at the moment, the Apollos one I would suggest is it. But many of these others have something to offer. Just bear in mind about the 30-year rule if you're studying. If you're writing essays, it's quite important. But whatever you do, just keep reading, because there is so much out there, so much to engage with, and I'm sure that some of it will really excite you and help you in your biblical studies, or perhaps towards your preaching, which hopefully will then bless the rest of the church. So if you've liked what I've had to say, remember the thumbs up, remember to subscribe, remember to ring the bell, and why not leave a comment? Why not ask a question? I do try to get back to everybody in a couple of weeks. But thank you very much for your support of this channel. It makes the world of difference, and may God bless you. And until next time, I just need to say this one word, which is bye.